Of Memhei Amid Aleph, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Merav. So we said regarding a trachea that it's treifa if most of it is severed. Now the Gemara is going to deal with what if it's not severed, but the trachea is a tube. In the circumference of the tube, there are a lot of little holes, tiny little holes. Do you say, well, each hole is tiny? Or do you say, no, if you were to take all those holes together, it would actually make roiv of the trachea being severed? So it says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Merav, Nikva Kinafa, if the trachea is punctured like a sieve, mitzdarfen l'rubai. If you have a strip of the trachea in circumference that has 1,000 tiny little holes, even though each hole is minuscule, but if you were to take all those holes and somehow combine it together, it would make roiv of the trachea being exposed, then it's ki'ilu, it's severed. Okay. So No. I don't know. No. It doesn't naturally have little holes. This is some disease or something happened to it. So it says the Gemara, Master of Yirmiyah, I have a kasha. Now the kasha, I'll just say the kasha out, so we'll see it inside. The kasha is based on this. When it comes to the skull of an animal, what makes it a treifa is if it has a hole the size of a surgeon's tool. Let's say an inch. Okay. So if it has a hole the size of an inch by a skull, it's treif. It's not an inch, but let's say. Says the Gemara, what if instead of a circle that's an inch, it's a very long strip? But it's still an inch. It's the same, it's just a different shape. It's weiter treifa. Okay. Now, that's regarding a skull. But then the Brisa says, regarding the trachea, if the many holes combined, if it's the shape of the hole is not, you have, let's say, a weirdly shaped hole or a couple shaped holes. The halacha is, if it combines together for the size of a coin, then it's a treifa. In other words, the kasha is, you're telling me that holes combine together for the roiv of the circumference. But another brisa says that holes combine together for the size of a coin. So which one is it? Is it the size of the coin when it regarding holes? I know severing it's roiv, but you're telling me when it comes to holes, one brisa says holes is you still need roiv, and the other brisa says that it's the size of a coin. So which one is it? So it says the Gemara, Master Rav Yirmiyah from a brisa. The brisa says Ubel Gulgoilis regarding the skull, Sheish Nekiv Echad Aruch, that a skull. The hole in a skull that makes it a treifa is a surgeon's tool, but that's normally round. What if instead of round it's a long slanted hole? The halacha is, as long as it all adds up to that surgeon's, that's enough. Meaning whatever the dimensions is for a surgeon's hole, let's say it's 1 inch, as long as it gets to that point, fine. Says the Gemara, now this is not negaya our discussion here, that's regarding the skull of an animal. But says the Gemara, Alma, kiven the shiuri malay mekadech. You see that because the size of a hole by a skull is the surgeon's drill, then it doesn't matter the size, it doesn't matter how many holes, it's mitzdarif to that. So l'moy l'kadech mitzdarif and hachanami. So says the brisa, kiven the shiuri beisser, because the size of the hole by the trachea is an isser, a coin. L'keisser mitzdarfin. So in other words, we have two different shiurim when it comes to the trachea, when it comes to holes in the trachea. One says roiv of the circumference, one says a coin. Which one is it? So the Gemara says incredibly simple, and that is, you could have holes that make it deficient, and you could have holes where it's not deficient. I'll give you an example. You could have a hole in a paper where you take a pen and you push it through the paper. That's a hole. But the paper itself is not deficient at all. The paper is still the same paper, you should have a hole in it. You could also take a hole punch, where there's now a circle of the paper that's missing. So says the Gemara, so it is with the trachea. If there are many holes, but there's no actual skin from the trachea missing, it's roiv. If the holes are actual pieces of the trachea that are being removed, like in a hole punch, then it's the size of a coin. So it's very simple. The holes are mitzdarif. What's the shear? It depends. If it's holes without missing some of the essence of the trachea itself, roiv. If some of the holes are actual skin of the trachea being removed, then you don't need roiv. Merely the size of a coin is going to treif it up. Says the Gemara, Ishtamitze, it must be Rav Yirmiyah forgot the answers. Hada Amar Rav Chalva, Rav Cham Bar Guri Merav, Nekav Meshiesh Ben Chesaron. If it's holes that are due to the chesaron, meaning that it's actually missing some of the skin of the trachea, then mitzdarfet l'keiser. Then the shear is a coin. She'ein b'chesaron, but let's say the holes are not due to missing the skin, they're just like you poked it through the pen through the paper, then it's mitzdarf from the roiv, and the shear is roiv. Similarly, Amar Rabbi Chan, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, nitla heimenu ritzua mitzdarf from l'keiser. If a strip of skin from the trachea is removed on the circumference, then the halacha is it's the shear of a coin. Again, notice how he says it's removed. He didn't say a hole. It's removed. If the skin is removed, it's the shear of a coin. Says the Gemara, similarly, they asked, this Shakavatari was asked of Yishum and Levi, Nikva Kenafa Mahu, what if there are many holes in a trachea? And he said, Amr Le, Hari Amru, Nikavim Sheyesh Ben Chasar Mitzar from the Keisr, Shem Chasar Mitzar from the Ruba. If part of the skin is missing, then the shear is a coin. If none of the skin is missing, it's just many holes, it's perforated, then the shear is rife. So here's the shaila. We said that many holes, and if it's deficient, then it's the size of a coin. And if it's not deficient, it's rive. Let's go with the deficiency. It's the size of a coin. That's by a cow. Cows have very big tracheas. What about a chicken? The entire chicken's tracheas itself is smaller than a coin. So that can't be. It can't be the same shear. So it says the Gemara ba'ifamai. So Amar Visa Bar Nachmeni l'didi mefar shalem in eder Elazar mikafloy menicha al pikana. Im chayves reva kana treifa, bim lav kashera. Amrav Papa v'simnach nafya. Basically, what you do is like this: you take the area that's slit open or that has the hole, cut it around it. Would that piece, if you were to remove, would that cover the top of the trachea? That's the shear by a chicken. So you have a hole on the side, so it's deficient, it's missing. If you were to take that, would that cover the top of the trachea? If that would cover the top of the trachea, that's big enough of a hole that it's treif. But if it wouldn't, that's the shear by a chicken. Again, because you can't go by a coin, the entire trachea is too small. Says the Gemara, nifchasa kedeles. What if instead of it's missing on the side, it's not missing the skin the size of a coin, but it's like a flap open. It's a flap that's like flapping open. So it's, for all intents and purposes, it's basically open, but it's not. So it's not severed. I guess it's just a flap of skin that's hanging open. It's hard to really know exactly the difference between this and severed, but it's flapping open. So the Gemara says, would a coin be able to fall in the slot? If a coin would be able to be pushed into that slot, then that's akin to it missing, and it's considered a chesaron, and it's a treifa. Weiter, nistika. Now, okay, the trachea is a tube. Oh, it's like this. Okay, so the trachea, we've been talking about a slit on the circumference. The Gemara is going to point out if it's slit this way, up to down, that doesn't matter. This doesn't matter b'chlal. It could be slit the entire way up and down. That's not a trachea. It's dafka around the circumference, the horizontal, not the vertical. It takes me so long to think. I have to think of a sun. The point is, horizontal, if it's cut horizontally, that's when it's a problem if it's right. But if it's vertical, that's fine. So the Gemara speaks out. The Gemara says, nistika, if the trachea was split down the length, much easier way to say it. If it's split down the length, so says the Gemara, the trachea has little rings. It looks like rings. It's rings of cartilage. If there's a ring on top that's complete, that's unsevered, that's uncut, and a ring on the bottom that's complete, the entire thing could be slit down the middle, down the vertical of it, doesn't matter. As long as it has one ring intact on top and one ring intact on the bottom. The Gemara points that out. It doesn't make sense why you should need a ring fully. It should just be that it's not fully severed. Like that it's not just 100% cut up and down. Why is it significant that you have a ring on top and a ring on the bottom? It's a strange thing. So the Gemara speaks it out. The Gemara says, you're right. Amrua kamed Rav Yochanan Amar, machul ya machul. The Gemara, why do you need a ring on top and a ring on the bottom? Your basic premise is that a slit up and down the vertical of the trachea is insignificant. Obviously, if it's completely cut from top to bottom, it'll pop open, then it's obviously not a trachea anymore. But why does it have to be a chulya on top and a chulya on the bottom? It shouldn't have to be a chulya. It should just be, as long as there's a little bit of strip intact on top and intact on the bottom, meaning it's 98% cut, but it's 1% on top, that should be enough. It shouldn't have to be a whole chulya. So the Gemara says, you're right. It just has to be a mashu on top. 98% cut is fine. 1% on top, 1% on the bottom is enough. And when they said this over in front of Rav Yonasan, do the Rabbanim in Bavel know how to explain like this? These are Rabbanim from Eretz Yisrael. Rav Yochanan, who was talking, he says, do you think the Rabbanim in Bavel know how to explain like this? Mamish, like the Torah of Eretz Yisrael. Okay. Tani Rav Chia Bar Yosef Kamei de Rav Yochanan. Okay, so we talked a little bit on Shabbos. There's the esophagus and the trachea. The esophagus goes into the stomach. So we said, how far down can you cut the esophagus? So we said basically to the point where it meets the stomach. Like conceptually, if you were to like put the knife like basically in the belly of the cow, it would be able to cut the esophagus. The esophagus is the food. So it goes straight from the mouth all the way down to the stomach. It's considered the esophagus all the way to the base of the stomach, where the stomach and esophagus meet. Conceptually, you'd be able to stick the knife into that point and conceptually and do it. But the problem is, so someone mentioned on Shabbos, but like, so I don't know what the question was, but I responded that that's only for the esophagus. The trachea connects to the lungs. It has a different shear. So like when the Gemara talked about cutting the esophagus that low, it would only work if you cut the esophagus and then like instantly went up to the trachea. Because the trachea and esophagus have different shiurim. The esophagus stops when it hits the stomach. The trachea connects to the lungs. So the Gemara says, Kol hatzavar kule kasha l'shchita. You can cut any part of the trachea mitabas hagdela, from the great ring, which is the top of the trachea, ad kanfei rea tachtoina, until the lower lobe of the lung. Meaning, in other words, until it reaches the lungs, but until it reaches the lower lobe. Now, that's a little strange because the lower lobe, if you're thinking of the lungs like my hand is the lungs, then it's the trachea connects, and the lower lobe is over here. That's a little strange because that means you're going through a lot of lung to get to the lower lobe is the lower part. So the Gemara says, no. The lower lobe is actually referring to the top of the lungs. It's if the animal was hanging upside down, the lower lobe is actually the top of the lungs. In other words, you can cut the trachea until it reaches the lungs. It called it the lower lobes because they would hang animals upside down. So what you're seeing is lower, right? This is lower. That's actually the top of the lungs. Okay. No. Amarava tachtoina shiel yoina. The lower lobe is actually the top of the lungs. Shani Omer, meaning. So why is it that you can't go all the way to the bottom of the lungs? Can't be. Why? Kol shepaishetes savar v'roya uvachelitanis. Okay, I think, I'm not 100% certain, but what it seems like is the trachea is this tube that goes into the lungs. It seems that that I know, but it seems that if you were to pull the neck of the animal and extend it, I'm thinking a little bit like those toys that pop, 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 pop. You know, those like the. I'm thinking that's a little bit how the trachea works. That if you were to pull it out, part of it that, like, sort of when the animal's relaxing, part of the trachea sort of settles into the lungs, but you could actually pull part of the trachea a little bit extended, a little bit out of the lungs, a little bit, sort of like a tube. That's what it seems like. Maybe. So that's what it seems like. So I did get videos, by the way, the OU Torah, they're pumping out some of the most graphic animal videos. Like, they're just like it's just flesh, and it's like, the Gemara says what it says about trachea, and I'm like it's 2 a.m. I cannot watch it. But anyway, so that's what it seems like. So the Gemara is saying, what part of the trachea can you cut? At some point it's in the lungs, can't cut anymore. But if you were to extend the neck out, you could sort of get maybe a couple more centimeters. So it says the Gemara, whatever the animal normally extends its neck in a comfortable way, when it's eating, it'll extend the neck. That is part of the trachea can cut. Shalai ta'anis, but you can't pull it further. Meaning, don't be that guy who's just pulling the neck out so you can cut all the way to the bottom. What if the animal itself did that? What if for some reason the animal has this habit of extending its neck past what it should? And that's natural. The animal is naturally extending its own trachea past what's normal. Can you cut the very bottom? Teku, we are not sure. Okay. Yes.
So one question is, cutting the trachea, do we care whether it's longitudinally or latitudinally?
No, you have to cut it horizontal.
I was saying, like, if there's a flap or whatever, we said, like, vertically for the esophagus.
No.
By the trachea.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I believe. Yosef, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon Lakish, Nafik Milsa Ben Ayu. This is the statement that came out of the discussion. Anas b'simanim, if the shaychet pulled out the pipe, the shachat psula, it's possible. Meaning, if you pull it out past what it's normally the part of the trachea that's in the lungs, and you pull too far, no good. Nikiv akana lamata min achaza nidin kareya. Similarly, past the part of the trachea that's already in the lungs, if it's punctured, the trachea of the halacha is a puncture doesn't trafe it up, right? It has to be cut 51%. It's the esophagus that gets punctured that's a trafe. But the trachea, a puncture doesn't do it. It has to be cut 51%. But if there's a part of the trachea that's already by the lungs, So think of the lungs over here, and there's a part of the trachea that's a little bit below. A puncture will do it. Why? Because the trachea below the lung area has the din of the lungs. And a lungs, a puncture doesn't. So although a trachea, a puncture will not trafe it, but if it's the part of the trachea that's settling under the lung area, then that trachea has a din of the lungs, and therefore it'll be trafed by a perforation, a hole. Tan Rabbanan, this is completely as an aside. One of the halachas is that you would, in the shlamim, you would give to the kaihanim, is the chaz of the chest, the breast of the animal. So what is the breast of the animal? Ezu chaza, zeharayas akarka. When the animal is standing up, it's the part of the chest that's facing the ground. Lamata arat savar, from the neck, lamayla akeres, until the first stomach. So basically you would make a line from the neck until the first stomach. You would just basically, like on myself, you would just cut the sides, the two ribs. Apparently, the first rib and the last rib you might have to break in order to get that area out, and you would just basically kunk, like AI, just the chest, and just hand it to the guy. Says the Gemara. Okay. The Mishnah then said that one of the psulim is if the membrane around the brain is punctured. Apparently, there are two membranes around the brain. As the Gemara is going to point this out, it's similar. One is a softer membrane and one is a harder membrane. This is similar to an egg. An egg has a harder white shell, but it has a thinner white shell, right? When you ever make hard-boiled eggs, you'll sometimes feel a very thin membrane. Brains also have that. So if there's a puncture, it's a trephus. It says the Gemara Ravish Modam Tavayu Karma Ilah Afagavdol Inkav Tata. If the first membrane is punctured, even if it didn't get through the second membrane, that's already a trefa. Merely puncturing one membrane of the brain is enough. Va'amri La Ad Inkav Tata, but some say no, both membranes have to be punctured. Amrab Shmuel Bar Nachmeni, V'simnach, the way to remember that both membranes have to be punctured is Chaysa de Mitnach Bemucha. It's like a pouch the brain is in. Apparently that helps. That you should remember that there's like a pouch that the brain settles in. That it's the outer membrane. It has to be punctured as inner membrane. It has to be punctured as well. Amar Rabbi Chanan, Rav Yechanan, Yeshuv and Levi, Kenegdai Bebeitzim Nicker. It's like eggs. Eggs, the way some some say testicles, but Pasha, some say this is an egg. The eggs have two. There's the outer shell, which is hard, and there's the inner shell. The point is, by the brain, both of them would have to be punctured for it to be a trefa. Not just one. All right, let's go back there. I told you, it's not a hard daf, it's just a lot of anatomy. Okay, basically it's like this. See, the animal has a brain, and then if the brain is punctured, it's a trefa. The brain connects to the spinal cord. Now the spinal cord, as we'll see in a moment, the spinal cord goes all the way basically to the tuchus of the cow. But basically it's like this. The brain and the spinal cord have different halachas. The brain punctured is a treifa. Spinal cord, it has to be severed roiv of the circumference of the spinal cord. So at what point is it no longer a brain, is it a spinal cord? You understand? Because they're connected. So says the Gemara, whatever is contained in the kedera means a pot. Meaning, what's in the cranium is considered the brain. Once the cranium starts to extend, then it's nida in kechut hashedra. That's considered the spinal cord. And how do I know where it's beginning to extend? Right? It doesn't really help that much. It's like whatever's in the cranium is the brain, and after that, how do I tell? So go to the next page. Article happens to have a picture. Apparently, if you were to cut open the brain on the back, if cows are like they're laying flat, right? So their neck is like the back of their brain is basically like where you put your tefillin, because they're like this. Apparently, there's two. Article translates it as the occipital condyles. Condyles. Yeah, was that I pronounced that properly? Ooh, look at that. I didn't even go to college. Point is, there's two of them. Those two is the beginning of the spinal cord. It says the Gemara, there's two bean-like things laying at the entrance of the cranium. From the beans onward, from these occipital condyles onward, that's the brain. Occipital condyles back, that's already the spinal cord. Says the Gemara. I assume we do, but I will say this. Any person who's giving shir on these things and pretends that they knew this before they opened up the article, okay. Unless you're like a full doctor, you know what I mean? Says the Gemara, but the actual beans themselves, the area, meaning, think of the area, the occipital condyles. From there onward is brain. From there backwards is spinal cord. They themselves, ein yodeh. It makes more sense that they have the status of the brain, where a puncture would be a treifa. Rav Yirmiyah badik ba'ofer. Rav Yirmiyah examined the bird. He also found that birds also have the occipital condyles. So that's a good thing to know. Oh, you ever watch videos? Rebelsky, Mamash knew this stuff. She'd open up an animal. Every kid. Adam Moskovich was telling me that Rebelsky, his father, who's a back surgeon, was Rebelsky's surgeon when he had issues. And he said that he's never had a patient before that Mamish knew everything. He said, like, he would start talking, and Rebelsky knew Mamish, his anatomy, Mamish knew everything. Like, he's like Mamish like a surgeon. Anyway, says the Gemara, Nikav Halev Lebeis Chalaloi. If the heart is punctured, it's a problem, it's a treif, as long as it goes into the chamber. Now, says the Gemara, Rav Zeira, Lebeis Chalal Katan, Lebeis Chalal Gadol. Apparently there's the smaller chamber on the right ventricle, and there's the larger chamber in the left ventricle. So the question is this a puncture to any of the chambers? Does it have to puncture all the way to the left ventricle? That's the question. So the Gemara says, well, I don't know the answer for this, but I know when it comes to the lungs, is it bronchi? Is that bronchi? Is that how the bronchi? But bronchi. Because Gavin was telling me it's bronchi, and I was like, that doesn't sound right. It's probably bronchi. Yeah, he doesn't know. He's British. So anyway, so the basic question is like this. When it comes to the chamber, it says the chamber. Is that any chamber of the heart, or is that dafka the larger left ventricle? So the Gemara says, well, when it comes to the bronchi of the lungs, says the Gemara Miloi Tanan, it says in the Mishnah Shimon Omer, Achatinakav lebeisam spunais. When it comes to the lungs, it's a psol, it's a treifa. If it goes through the outer membrane, goes all the way into the bronchi. And says the Gemara, it has to puncture the larger bronchi. Apparently on each lobe there's a larger bronchi.
The right side's always larger. That's why kids always choke more with the right side.
Oh, that's interesting. So the larger is on the right side. I would have thought that each person is unique because science is fluid. But anyway, well, science is whatever you want it to be. Anyway, that's not for now. Point is, so it has to be. So when it comes to the,
that's why you lean left to drink the wine.
Yes, that's why. So when it comes to the bronchi, it says bronchi, and it means the larger one, which is apparently the right. So doesn't it stand to reason that when it comes to ventricle, it also means the larger one, which is the left? Meaning, if bronchi, it means the larger, so stomach chambers of the heart also means the larger. So says the Gemara, no. Hachi hashta, the lashon is not the same. Hasam lebeis hasfunais ketani. It says lebeis hasfunais, which is the chamber of the bronchi, using plural, that implies the primary one, where everything flows. But hachal lebeis chalali ketani, over here it's singular, implying each one on its own is an option. Meaning, in other words, over there it's plural, over here it's singular, so maybe you can't compare the two. Mali chalagalo, mali chalakatan. Okay, so no answer on that one. Let's keep going. Kana halev, the pipe of the heart. The Gemara is going to define this in a second. There's a part of the body that's called the pipe of the heart. Rav Amar b'mashu, Shmuel Amar b'rubai. Rav says if there's any puncture in the pipe of the heart, it's a treifa, but Shmuel says only if it's severed by the majority. Now, what is this pipe of the heart? Because we talked about the esophagus, we talked about the trachea, we talked about the heart itself. What is the pipe of the heart? So it says the Gemara, Hainu kanalev, Amrav, Yisabarav, Chaylev shalgabi tefanis. It's the fat on the walls. Now this kind of sounds like it's the fat surrounding the walls of the heart. The problem is, fat, I mean, if you cut a little fat, you're telling me a puncture in the fat is going to make the person an animal treifa? Apparently there's fat around the heart. I don't know. So you're telling me a puncture is going to make a treifa? That doesn't make any sense. It says the Gemara, what it means like this, they have an article has a picture, in between, separating the lung and the heart, there's a strip of the aorta, which is encased in fat. So it's really a puncture in the aorta. So and it's just encased in fat. That's the kana halev. One opinion says that it's treif if it's punctured. The other opinion says it's treif if it's cut majority.
So we need a lot of fat.
I don't think you want so much fat surrounding your heart. I feel like that's probably not a good thing. I feel
stuff is surrounded by layers of
muscles.
Called the myocardium.
Yeah, but you don't want fat around the heart. It's not good. It's not good. Okay. Says the Gemara, Amra Meimar Mesheder of Nachman, Tlosa Kani Have. There are three pipes that branch off from the trachea as it goes into the chest. Now, by the way, the Mefarshim point out they're not actual three branches of the trachea. So what the Mefarshim say this is probably referring to as major blood vessels. There are three. Yeah, this is they describe. The Art Scroll says these three pipes is probably the pipe of the heart, the aorta, the one that goes off to the lungs. That's posterior vena cava, the vein that returns the blood, and the one from the liver is, I forgot the name. Basically, it's three. Huh? Okay, maybe. Yes. So those points, there's three. The blood vessels, you describe them as blood vessels? Yeah. They're three blood vessels. So it says the Gemara, Chad parish l'liba, one goes off to the heart. Chad parish l'reya, one goes off to the lungs. Chad parish l'kavda, and one goes off to the liver. The question is, what is the status of these three blood vessels, puncture-wise? So it says the Gemara, dereya kareya, the one that goes to the lungs is like the lungs. Now, lungs get trafed up by a puncture. So a puncture in that one, in the ulterior vena cava, superior. To me, to him it's superior. It's pretty chashiv. I'd like to think that it's a little less chashiv. But anyway, sure. Point is, if there's a puncture by the one near the lungs, that's a treifa. The kavda kikavda, the one by the liver, whatever that one's called, I forgot that one. Something cava, inferior vena cava. That one. Can you settle down, Gavin? So anyway, so that one has a status of the liver. What's the halach of the liver? Liver is not trafed up by a puncture. It has to be removed. So only if that entire thing is removed is a treif. And the liba, the mashayla is, what about the aorta? Mar barchia masni ibcha. I'm sorry, the liba pligi, that is a machlekes. That one says a puncture and one says roiv. Says the Gemara, Mar barchia masni ibcha. He had a slightly different version. Dereya kikavda. The one that goes to the lungs is like the liver, that it's only treif if it's entirely removed. The kav de kareya, the one that goes to the liver is like the lungs, that it's a treif if it's a puncture. And the liba pligi, and the heart is taka, the aorta is taka machlekes, if it's a puncture or if it's cut roif. Also, Rav Chia bar Yosef, Am l'shmaita de Rav kamei de Shmuel. Rav Chia bar Yosef said over this version of Rav in front of Shmuel, and he said, Amar lei, he said, "Ihachi Amar Abba liyada b'treifus liklum." He says, if this is Rav saying he doesn't really understand the laws of treifus at all, so, ooh. Anyway, Nishbar Hashedra. Okay, this next part, last sugya of the day, I think, and that is the spinal cord. So the spinal cord has nerve tissue, surrounded by skin. That's what it seems like. All right, that sounds about as simple as we're going to go. So it says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanan Chut Hashedra Shenifsach Berubai. When it comes to the spinal cord, it's a treif if it's severed by its majority. Divrei Rabbi. Rav Yaakov Omer Afilu Nikar. Rav Yaakov has a chumrah that he holds the spinal cord is a problem even if it's punctured. But the Gemara says, and Hoira Rebbe Rav Yaakov, but Rav Huna ein halacha Rav Yaakov. Although Rebbe paskin like Rav Yaakov, we do not pass on Rav Yaakov. We paskin that the spinal cord is not a problem if it's punctured; it's a problem if it's severed entirely, majority. Now here's the shaila: severed externally or internally. Meaning, if it's severed externally, that means the skin is ruptured. Then the nerves will just flow out. So that's for sure a treifa. The question is, what if it's entirely intact, but internally there was a break in the spinal cord, the nerves snapped inside the spinal cord, but the skin is still intact. So is that considered a treifa as well? So says the Gemara, yeah, ask him. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Don't ask the animal if the spinal cord is severed.
No, I'm saying if you see it there on the floor.
Yeah. The point is, if the animal clearly is paralyzed, but you check the spinal cord, it's fully intact on the outside, which means on the inside it's severed. The question is that a treifa? Says the Gemara v'kamarubai, Rav Amar Rav Oira. Rav says it's only a treifa if the majority of the skin is ruptured, which means the nerve endings are spilling out. That's when it's a treifa. But Amri Lo Rav Moicha. But some have a different version that according to Rav, it's a treifa even if the skin is entirely intact, but the inside is ruptured. Says the Gemara, if you believe that the inside spinal cord being severed is a treifa, kal v'chomer if there's a rupture of the skin, because then the nerves are just flying out. But But if you say that it's only a treifa if the majority of the skin is ruptured, what if the skin is intact but the inside nerve endings are severed? Is that a treifa as well? So tashima, because you could argue that if as long as it's staying within the skin, even though the nerve endings split, it's fine. So the Gemara says, Tashmad Amar Nivli Amar Rav Huna. Nivli said in the name of Rav Huna, it's a new name. Rubai Sha'amru Roiv Oiroi. All we care about is the skin. If the skin is ruptured, it's a treifa, but if the skin is not ruptured, I don't care what's going on inside. Meaning, if the internal spinal cord is severed, but the actual skin is intact, that's fine. Says the Gemara, Rav Nasan Bar Ovin Havik Yosef Kamei Derav. Badak Baroiv Oiroi. Rav was checking the outside. Apparently there was an animal, I don't know if this is a shaila, something came up, but he was checking the spinal cord on the outside, looking to see if it was severed. So, after the spinal cord skin was intact, he was trying to see if the inside there was a sever. I don't know how he would do this, but he was checking the inside internally after checking the external, and the external passed the test. So says the Gemara, Amar Le, they said to Rav said to Rav Nasan Bar Ovin, once the outside is intact, it's not a treif anymore. You can stop checking. It doesn't matter what's going on the inside. Says the Gemara, Amar Rab Bar Chanam Rabbi Shimon Levi, Nismarech Pasel. If the nerve tissue of the spinal cord becomes liquefied, that means that if you were to cut open the skin, it would pour out like a liquid. I don't know what they look like when it's healthy, but not liquid. So if it liquefies, that's puzzle. Not only that, nismase is puzzle. Not only liquefied, but even if you were to pour it and it doesn't spill out like a liquid, but they just sort of like mush a little bit, like wet, like soft wax. I'm talking about the nerve endings that are inside the nerve tissue inside the spinal cord column. If it liquefied, it's for sure possible, but not even liquefied. Even if it's softer, just softened to the point where it's like, it's not hard wax, it's like soft wax, that's also a psul. The Gemara says, Ezo Hamracha ve'Ezo Hamsasa. What's the difference between the two? Practically, Hamracha kol shenishma kekitain. Hamracha means that it liquefies, that it pours like a liquid. Mismasa is kol she'eni yachal la'amid. Now, mismasa, by the way, Rashi explains, it doesn't mean that the internal one is soft. Even the spinal cord will just droop. Meaning, the first version is that the spinal cord is mamash like a liquid. The second version is the spinal cord is not a liquid, but it doesn't hold up strength. It droops down. That itself is also a psul. What if the spinal cord is drooping down, but not because of an injury, but because apparently the nerve endings became stronger, they hardened, and they're too heavy? I don't know. That's a thing. It became too heavy, and then you can't hold your back up. So what's the halacha? So teiku, not sure. Just to finish up the daf. Classic. I don't know. Bei Rav Amri, nismaseis pasul. Rav said if the nerve tissue softened, it's psul, but nismazmes. But if it just lost substance on its own, it's kosher. Meaning apparently that's more solidified than softened. Softened is where mamish droops down. This is just a little soft. That's fine. So nismazmes is kosher. That lashon, it's just softening on its own. That's kosher. Says the Gemara, but didn't Rav Shimon say nismazmes is a treifa? So the Gemara says change the lashon. Nismazmes itmar. Rav Shimon didn't say nismazmes. He said nismazmes, meaning he said softened, not. Softened, not nismazmes, which is more solidified. Says the Gemara, again. So by Rav Amri that nismazmes, which is lost substance, that's kosher. That's not a treifa. Says the Gemara, Aini's is true. This is a weird story, by the way. The Gemara says, Levi have a yasib be'misusa. Levi is sitting in the bathhouse. Chazil hu gaver detari l'reisha, and he saw a man smash his head into the wall. Probably not on purpose. Not like that. There's a quarterback who once tries to celebrate against the Giants. Smashed his head against the wall. He got injured. No. This he probably fell. Levi sees him smash his head against the wall, and he's like, that's a shame. Ooh, that's a shame. And Levi said, Amar nismazmes meicha dedain. His head was just nismazmes. And lav d'leicha nismazmes. He said that. Now the question is, why is Levi saying that? That it's nismazmes. Pashtus, he's saying the guy's going to die. So you see that nismazmes, that's by a person, but by a behema, nismazmes would be a sign of a treifa. So it says the Gemara, no. Rabbi really, Nismazbeis, he's going to live. So what was Levi pointing out? He's no longer going to be able to have children. And now you know that. And that's information you now have. It says the Gemara, Ad Heichen Chut Ashedra. Okay, basically, you have the spinal cord, which is a problem if it's severed by roiv. Now, the animal's spinal cord goes all the way back to the back of the animal, and even mamish goes like to the tuchus of the animal, and it starts branching out. Artzker has a picture. It branches out eventually to the sciatic nerve. So it starts off as one, and then it starts to branch out. So it says the Gemara understands, this will end the daf with this, the Gemara understands that once the spinal cord starts branching out, it's not considered so strong anymore that if it's severed, it's going to be a treifa. I mean, once it branches out, then if you sever that part of the body, it's not going to be a treifa. It's only a problem if it's severed when it's one cord intact. But once it starts branching out, then it's already a system where a severance is not going to destroy it. So it says the Gemara, till it branches out. Once it branches out, it's not a treifa anymore. Now, says the Gemara, what exactly does this mean? We'll end with this. Rav Dimi bar Yitzchak was going to leave the town of, he was leaving to go to the town of Chayzoi. Also, Rav Yehuda. But before leaving, he quickly went to Rav Yehuda. He was on his way out. Show me where it branches out on an animal so that it's no longer a treifa. So he didn't, Rav Yehuda, this is by the way, this Gemara is a remez to what I had in high school. I'll explain in a moment. Rav Yehuda didn't want to just explain it to him; he wanted to show him. So, give me a goat. I'll show you on the goat's animal. I'll dissect the animal. I'll show you exactly where. So, so he brought him a very fat goat. Apparently, there was a goat that they had just shechted, but it was very, very fatty. So he says, this is too fatty, you won't be able to see. Meaning, apparently on some of the animals, you'll be able to see it branching out, but this is so fatty, it's going to be hard to see. So he goes, gets a lean animal. So the hip bones on this ones are protruding, you're not going to be able to see it either. So he's like, all right, I got to go. Rav Yehuda said to him, Tag merach gamra. Rav Yehuda said, let me just teach you the concept, because you got to go, and we don't have time for this. I'll just tell you outside. Hachi Amar Shmuel, this is what Shmuel said. Ad achas treifa. Ours has a picture. Basically, it starts off as a spinal cord, single spinal cord. It's severed, roiv, treifa. Then it starts to branch out. There are 3 different segments of branching out. It branches out once, it branches out twice, then it branches out a third time. So he said like this: Ad achas treifa, shlish ksher. Up to that first branch out, it's for sure a treifa. After the third, it's not a treifa at all. Shnia, but if it severs in between 2 and 3, ein yodeh. That I'm not sure. Oh, stop. See, I had